Same here, Nathan. How are you doing?
Very, very good.
Nice. Thank you so much for joining us on our podcast. And I was going through a profile, pretty impressive one. You're doing a lot of things in the new age technology space. So, rather than I introducing you, why not you take 1 minute of time, Nathan, and kind of introduce to our audience what have you've been doing right now and what has been your experience so far?
Absolutely. I'm Nathan Williams. I'm a Canadian founder living in Berlin, Germany. The founder and CEO of MindSpider. So what we do is traceability and digital product passports. We started using blockchain to create a digital record of where products come from, and we attach those to products. We've been around since 2017. We're still a small team, but we're doing better and better. And yeah, that's what we do. Myself, I've written extensively on the topic. I wrote one of the first white papers on how to do digital traceability using blockchain back in 2017. And this was picked up and cited by a number of international organizations, which led to the creation of MindSpider back in the day. And so we ended up doing some projects with some pretty big brands, including Google and Volkswagen and Cisco, tracking metal coming out of South America and Africa. And that has led us to where we are today.
Absolutely. Now, Nathan, for somebody from, from in a space which is outside blockchain space, could you help us understand that what problem are you actually solving in global supply chain using blockchain, like the traceability piece, if you can explain to our audience?
Well, I'll tell you something. There are a lot of different problems that this addresses. And the main one for our customers is on how to make your products more visible. A lot of the companies that want to work with us, they're not doing it because they have to. They're doing it because they want to get an ROI or a return on all of the hard work they've put in. Most of the companies that we work with are some of the better companies out there, and they have to compete with companies that maybe aren't so transparent, that don't have such good practices. And so if you're selling, for example, metal on an open marketplace, then someone might be, using questionable labor practices, and another one might have very, very good ones. But to the buyer, they look the same. And so by attaching information directly to the metals, you can have a much better picture of what you're buying, why you're buying, get access to better markets. You might be able to sell into places that are willing to pay more. And so this is one of the top reasons. The other thing that we do with this is it's not just for raw materials and metals, that's where we started, but we're also doing this for downstream components like electric vehicle batteries or motors and drive systems. Companies have to put them on the market, but then at some point they reach the end of their life, and you don't just want to throw something that's very expensive with a lot of valuable material in it into the garbage. Being able to attach information on on how to recycle, how to handle it at end of life, how to reuse it, things like that can help these companies.
Absolutely. So it's kind of, it helps make sure that you're maintaining quality downstream and also upstream, and
Exactly. And one of the things that I've come to, which was I found quite interesting, I started this with the idea we want to have more transparent supply chains. Now that's a good problem, but there's an issue with it, and that it is a systemic problem. It's sort of like we want to solve climate change, right? There's no single person that's responsible for climate change. It's a system that's responsible. We're all affected by it. But because there's no single entity or company or person responsible, who do you sell your solution to, right? And the same thing is the problem for supply chains, is that you've got buyers, you've got sellers, and they're all very different. You've got manufacturers, and there's different metals and traders, and so who's responsible? And the answer is everyone and no one at the same time. So being able to go from a big systemic problem and boil it down and to find a solution for individual problems that play into the systemic problem is how you make progress.
oh, this is pretty insightful and quite relatable, because the same kind of a problem also happens, Nathan, while companies are doing ESG compliances. Because
Oh, yes.
yeah, can you throw a bit of light on that? Like,
Well, ESG compliance is an eternal problem, right? Because from a company point of view, right? From a company point of view, it's just cost, right? A company wants to sell their things. They want to sell their devices, their pens, their iPhones, whatever it is. And when you're looking at ESG compliance, from a company point of view, it's something they have to do in order to sell the product. From the point of view of the people actually working on it, it's different. It's their job. It's the reason they got into this in the first place. They're very passionate, motivated people that are working at these big companies, and they really want to make a difference in the world. They want to reduce carbon emissions. They want to have more sustainable products. But at the end of the day, they have trouble tying their work to the revenues of the company. They're viewed as pure cost. And so I worked with some of the largest companies in the world that had very good intentions, but the people had trouble getting a 10,000 euro budget, even though they were in a multi-billion-dollar company. And this is the reason.
So one of the major questions that come here is that, a lot of the legacy companies have big ERP systems, PLM systems in place. Where do you see it? Like whether blockchain will integrate with them? Because a lot of the companies, while implementing this kind of a solution, will also think of integration aspects of it, or blockchain based technology can replace the entire ERP system.
I think that when we're talking about blockchain, we have to have a certain level of expectation management. Blockchain is a powerful technology because it has a few characteristics that you can't find anywhere else, right? You have the ability to move trust away from a central party. That's good. You've got a way of keeping different companies or parties or people who don't know each other accountable. That's good. You've got a way of printing your own money and then getting buy-in from people to a project without having to go through traditional funding methods. That's interesting. But at the same time, you've got some trade-offs. It's a slower technology. You're trading speed for security. It's also puts a lot of responsibility on the people using it. At the beginning of MindSpider, we were very, very blockchainy, I guess you want to say. We designed a system that was really meant to be used in a blockchainy way, where everyone would have a wallet and then they would trade a token or an NFT that represented a certain shipment of material or a certain product. And there is nothing wrong with the concept of that. But in the real world, it ran into a lot of problems. Problem number one was that when you have wallets, if I need a wallet and you need a wallet, and I'm sending you a product, that means we both have to agree to use the same system before we begin, right? That also means you need to be technical enough to know how to use a wallet and to download it and to put ether on it to pay the costs of using the system. So, and maybe in a big company, the person using this is not so technical. They're not used to doing this. And the third problem that you run into with this digital twin model, you can imagine, you've got this NFT that represents a certain shipment of metal. You send the metal, and then at some point, you've got to send the NFT. What if you send it to the wrong wallet? One, that's a problem. Number two, this is great for trading. It's very, very efficient, right? But if you've got metal, metal doesn't stay metal usually. It usually turns into some sort of component, which turns into some sort of end product. At each stage of the supply chain, you've got to do something. You've got to freeze this token and then make a whole new one. And so it ends up getting very complicated if you've got a lot of products going through. And you have to also understand that usually with a blockchain type system, you're going to be talking in the order of seconds to do a single transaction and confirm it. Whereas with a large company, you might have hundreds of thousands of products going through. And so everything sort of depends on the use case. And so over time, we started looking at different use cases. The pure blockchain use case is still really interesting in certain use cases. Imagine, for example, you mined a ton of gold and you broke it into one ounce bars and you stored it under a mountain somewhere, and you made an NFT for each one of those bars, and then you could trade those. The trading aspect would be much more efficient with a token, right? This is the sort of thing that's actually super useful. And then you can start to design systems where you've got a virtual gold, and maybe you've got a take back mechanism so that someone can redeem the virtual gold for real gold to connect it more solidly to the actual price of gold. But because you're keeping the gold in the same format, and because it's really mostly a trading use case, the pure blockchain works very well. In supply chain, the main aspect that you find useful in the blockchain, well, there's been a couple, but number one has been the immutability. So if you're taking metals or products from one company and putting it to another, and the companies don't know each other, maybe they're in different countries, there's oftentimes problems with fraud. You put in certain data and then the data gets changed. This way, no one can change the data. The second thing that you can do is you're collecting data along every step of the supply chain. So you can imagine, for example, if you're making batteries. I knew a company that was making batteries, and they asked their suppliers, who asked their suppliers, can you tell me that the metal that goes into this battery is not coming from child labor, or that someone has audited this? And what they did is they sent back a PDF in an email that said this metal is okay. But it wasn't what metal. Like, it wasn't attached to a shipment. It wasn't like there was no context to it. You didn't know when the data was there. You don't have any proof that there was an ongoing check or any sort of chain of custody. So the proof just wasn't available. Whereas if you start collecting data at regular intervals, and you know when it was, and you know who put it in there, it's still possible to fake the system or to defraud it, but then you've got a record of it. And then you can audit it. And then you can start to do things to give you more confidence. And this is what we've discovered, is that even though the pure blockchain wasn't useful for directly integrating into ERP systems, or if you have a single set of private keys, it's not so great if you've got an $80 billion company that has multiple people that might be responsible. So even though it wasn't perfect for everything, the fact that it was useful for certain use cases within the supply chain opened people up to recognize that tracing this material is still possible. And so the way that systems work nowadays is that you've got traceability systems that have elements of the blockchain, but they have other technologies as well in order to safeguard the data, but in order to also meet these business needs. And so it becomes part of a bigger overall technology stack.
I got it. Nathan, once we talk about blockchain, there's a lot of talks which goes around the various regulations which are present inside various geographies, especially from the perspective of, digital, passport. And especially if you talk about European markets as well, there's a lot of regulations in place. So would like to take your insights and your views on what are the main regulatory challenges which are there in order to, to make sure that we derive the maximum output of the blockchain technology in various industries.
I think that when we're talking about the regulatory challenges, everything sort of depends on where we're talking, right? Like different countries have different approaches to regulation. I was speaking to some companies in India recently, and they were not as concerned about regulation because regulation tends to make it so that the lowest player can meet the requirements.
Yes.
And so usually it doesn't result in a lot of changes at a company level. Whereas the companies that want to use this, if they're in India, are doing it because first of all, they want to compete globally. And second of all, because they really believe that it's the right thing to do. So it's a strategic move. But the thing is, I've seen that as well in places like Europe. Often the discussion of why to adopt these technologies and to start moving forward comes from regulation. But the reason that they go for it is more strategic. It's that they see that there are talks and that their customers are demanding better products or more transparency. And so they ask themselves, maybe if we move first, we will have an advantage. 9 times out of 10, the companies that work with us are doing it for strategic reasons, and the companies that come to us because of compliance reasons will wait until the last possible minute. They'll say, okay, well, there's a regulation coming up in 2027. It's going to bite. Maybe we'll wait until then before we start. It's like, no, you're going to need at least 8 months, 9 months to get all the data together, to get this rolled out. Okay, 8 months, 9 months, maybe we'll wait till next year then. That's what it is.
So Nathan, you talked about mining, you talked about, battery segment. There, let us know about more industries like retail. So retail
Uh-huh.
also has a huge potential for blockchain.
Well, absolutely. Okay, so the main areas for this type of traceability, and you'll hear me, I'll use traceability more than I'll use blockchain, because
Yes,
more often than not, the technology that makes it work is less important to the average person than what you're trying to do with it, right?
yes,
And so with traceability, when we're talking about retail, okay, so retail is generally, I've never been super warm on retail, to be honest. And I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. It's certainly valuable for all of the products that go into the market. You know, if you get a can of tuna, you want to make sure that it doesn't have dolphins in it. Or if you get a, uh, or if you, yeah, you want to know when it was produced and this sort of thing. But it's generally the case that you're going to scan a QR code once. And you're going to say, you're going to look at it and you're going to go, oh, that's interesting. Now I know where it comes from. And then you never want to think of that again. Right. And this is, I mean, that's what I want to do. I don't want to go and scan all my groceries and then scan my clothes and see the names of the people that put it. I might do it once. But the whole idea is that we expect as humans that if I'm buying something, it should be good enough. Someone should have done their work to make sure I'm not buying from slaves, or someone should have done the work that says I'm not getting heavy metal poisoning when I buy my can of tuna. Like, I hope someone is doing that because I've got other things to do as a consumer. And so that's why, from a retail perspective, I see it much more as providing an audit trail so that consumer protection and so big companies can go and they can verify what they're buying. I often will use the mantra or the slogan that we all have the right to know what we're buying, where it comes from, and under what conditions it's been produced. And I believe in that. I believe in that very, very thoroughly. And I think it applies to companies as well as to individuals, that if they're buying something, they should have the right to know what it is. Is it of the quality I've asked for? Is it coming from where you say it's coming from? That's it. At least for individuals, we shouldn't have to check and police each time. Someone should be checking for us, and it should be possible to check. And like, I don't want to have to go and scan every bottle of milk and say, okay, make sure there's no melamine in it or something like. And so that's with consumers. I think that for consumers, it ends up being an awareness platform and more than it is a regular use case. Whereas when you're dealing with companies, it's a regular thing, right? They want to get data out of it. They want to put that into business intelligence systems. They want to look at how that affects their carbon emissions and see if they can change anything, right? And they also want to have some sort of pressure mechanism to put on their suppliers to say, look, you're giving us certain products with certain unknowns in it. You got to do better. And now I know what I want you to do better with, right? So it's a way of managing and controlling your supply chain. Now, when we're talking about other industries, the biggest ones are agriculture, textiles,
real estate. Real estate, I think.
real estate's an interesting one. I would say less so, but it's not because you don't need it. It's because real estate tends to have longer time windows, right?
Yes,
So if
yes.
you imagine you put a product passport on a building, right? You could get a QR code, put it on a building, and you have all of the certifications, like it's LEED certified, it's, how it handles the water, the carbon emissions of the products that went into it, how to do maintenance on it. Maybe some repair guys can scan it and see what repairs need to be done or get the architectural diagrams. That's all very cool. And at the same time, it's not something that's been tapped into very much because change hands on a much longer scale, right? People have been more looking on things like electronics, right? Because electronics, especially consumer electronics, have maybe a 3-4 year lifespan, and then you move to the next one, and so then you have to recycle them. And so if you're recycling them every 3-4 years, is it a refrigerator? Does it have harmful gas in it? Is it, is there lead in it? Like, and there's such a variety of these things that a recycler often doesn't know what to do with them. And so having this type of information is very important. When we get, like right now, we're still in the infancy of the industry, but as this gets bigger, recyclers are going to be able to automatically scan these products and have a better idea of what has to be done to recycle them safely. And you'll be able to extract more value out of them as well, because we'll be able to have the chemical compositions and instructions right within the product and have robots do it for us, right? This is the idea, is automation of these things that right now is just sort of handled haphazardly without knowledge.
Yeah. Jewelry is one segment, I think, where there's a lot of blockchain that is being used.
100%. We've been working with a jewelry company for the past a couple of years. And that's based in Brazil, and it was a very interesting challenge that they had, because they're sourcing locally, but they needed to prove it. And so, being able to prove local sourcing, responsible sourcing, and show that in the finished product with a product passport it helped them to achieve better pricing. The challenge with this is we all have motivation, right? We all have motivation for why we want to do these things, but until you can tie it to money, it becomes very difficult to justify. It's sort of like everyone wants a better world, but if my resources are tight and I have to choose something, I'm going to choose whatever I can get away with that doesn't have consequence, because it's the age-old problem. You privatize the profits and socialize the responsibility or the costs, and it's because we're human. And so this is a way of trying to tie those responsibilities back to the people that produce them, back to those profits.
And absolutely, you are so bang on, because even if you see of, environmental sustainability as well, there's a lot of protocols that came into, like Kyoto Protocol and all that, which basically incentivizes countries to sell their carbon credits and earn money out of that.
Uh, I remember early on in MindSpider, I had a friend who once told me, every problem that we face today is the unintended consequence of the solution to a problem we solved yesterday. And I really like that. It's like Kyoto Protocol. It has unintended consequences, and you can't predict all of these things. And and I think I'm at peace with the fact that we'll never predict all of these things, but it's an ongoing challenge. Even with, like, I look at climate change, right? It's an unintended consequence of the solution to a huge problem, which was production. We managed to go from one person being able to plow a field in, a week, to being able to plow like 100 fields in like a day because of oil. And it's beyond that, like, we can move all over the place. It's amazing the problems we solved, and now we've got a consequence of that.
And this is so spiritual also, Nathan, because more we are actually moving forward, we are actually, kind of getting into the same cycle again and again.
Hmm. No, it's true. I think the more that we're aware of it, the more that we're at least going to be solving from this cycle from a higher up
Yes.
place, as opposed to being at the same level. Yeah, I once heard someone describe this as the big systemic problems of the world can all be boiled down to income inequality. And if you think about it, there's a lot in that, right? If you've got a large hoard of wealth on one side, this is what leads to mass consumerism, which is leading to climate change. It leads to suboptimal designs of products. Even something as simple like, people trying to push their solutions to climate change. One of the big solutions people are trying to push is electric cars.
Yes. Yes.
Electric cars are not going to solve climate change.
Yes. Right.
Electric cars are not going to save the planet. They're going to save the car companies,
Yes.
right? Because what would be a better solution if the climate change was the problem is public transit, right? Would be more social programs and things like that for helping people and for reduced consumerism. But you know what? Electric cars are better than
Maybe
no
creating
electric
jogging
cars.
tracks. Maybe creating jogging tracks from your home to the office.
Jogging tracks, bicycles, walkable cities, city
Yes.
design, right?
Yes.
City design so that you don't need as many cars. But the city design that we have was not just because of the oil industries. It came out of things like the Cold War and wanting to have populations not in the middle of the city. There's all sorts of factors that go into the reasons things are the way they are today. And oftentimes it was problems that we were solving yesterday, and just the priorities changed.
Nathan, one of the things, which I think I was actually reading about is that there are a lot of local artisans who make a lot of goods. And there's also a concept called, I think it is something called geographical tag or something like that. That is, if somebody like a guild system, it still exists in a lot of countries where there's a guild which makes a product or, kind of an artifact. And then there is on the other side, brands want to kind of preserve their brands, the goods that they're selling. And that is where also blockchain is making a huge impact, I think, in kind of, protecting these minorities or, small scale businesses, making sure that their business runs sustainably, their tags are not being copied and used by somebody
That's a
frivolous.
really interesting use case. I will show you something. For Christmas this year, all of the MindSpider team got a little mug that was made by a local artisan. And what we did is we made a little QR code that went on it for each mug so that we would have a record of who made it and the artisan. And we even put a little video of the process, and they're all handmade. And so it was sort of a record and a history and a unique ID for each one. And this is exactly what you're talking about, is that if you've got sort of like, it's sort of like a new digital way of keeping track of an item's provenance, and especially in handicrafts or in an area where this is quite important, this is a way of getting a better field of view.
Yeah, absolutely, Nathan. Now, my last question will basically take you like 6, 7 years back. Is that what is reach compliance?
Oh my gosh, you've been doing your research. So the thing is, my background as an entrepreneur has largely been in helping bigger companies deal with regulations in Europe, but using technology. So in Europe, we had in 2013 we had a regulation passed called REACH, which was I forget I forget what it stands for, but it was something like the registration for chemicals,
There's
something like.
registration, evaluation, authorization, restriction, data sharing, and restriction of chemicals.
Yes. So the whole idea behind REACH was that every chemical that was used in a process or sold within Europe would need to have data on it about how it affected human health, about hazards, about how it was used, and then based on what the risk was to the workers that used it or to the people that received it, it could be restricted in its use. It could be banned entirely, or maybe it would be fine, but maybe it would have increased labeling laws or something like that. It was a huge change to the way things are done because the chemicals are all around us and they're used in everything, and you don't always know how many chemicals there are in the products that you're getting. And if you're buying a finished product from overseas, you also don't. And so what this required was for different creators of chemicals or importers of chemicals to actually work with their competitors and get all of this scientific data and make a registration for every single chemical that was sold within Europe. And this resulted in a huge amount of data, and it was very difficult to keep up with this. So my previous company I started was called Subvise. And so I had started a company for keeping track of this chemical information. So you just enter a unique chemical name or an ID for the chemical, and it would tell you what the status was and if anything had changed, if new data had come up on it. It was a big chemical database. And so I ran that for a while. And I ended up selling that in 2015 to one of my competitors because I thought we would go further together than on my own. And then when I started MindSpider, a lot of the experience I had from running that previous company came into play. What's interesting is that my friend who I actually sold my previous company to ended up also starting a blockchain company. And his was more chemicals focused. And we talked a lot about how to apply this for chemicals and what the use cases were. It was an interesting time for all of us, I think, because specifically around the really hazardous chemicals, there was a big need to be able to use this type of technology to track what were they actually used for, how were people exposed to them and what should it have been, and then make automated reports. And so that's sort of where we came from.
Superb. This was very insightful, Nathan. And I
Thank you very
think
much, Rishikesh. I hope it was interesting.
absolutely, Nathan. It was very interesting. I will be in touch. I'm in touch with you on LinkedIn. We'll stay in touch.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me on the show.